Hello, Internet, and welcome to my review for the first 3 episodes of Goblin Slayer. Ooh boy, this is gonna be fun. Uh, alright. I have a lot of issues with these episodes. But there was no previously because this is the first 3 episodes, so let's just jump right on in. When we when we start out, um, we're introduced to, like, this really video game style guild ranking system. And it's kind of a problem throughout the entire series. One of the more minor problems, to be sure, but it's definitely a problem throughout the entire series. It definitely doesn't feel like a real fantasy world. It feels like too much of the story is like, something out of a video game or definitely a tabletop game. There are way too many references to I can only use X spell this many times per day, which feels like straight out of D&D. Um, so yeah, already the world, there's not really a good start to the show. The world just does not feel real. But anyway, we have this party, who they get the priestess, who's the main character, into her, actually, first a quick comment on the naming scheme of this show. So, I'm probably a little less hard on it than a lot of people who are just like, oh, it's not creative or whatever. But, like, so for one thing, my favorite fantasy anime of all time is Maoyu, which does this exact same thing. It works really well there. And I don't think this show is definitely nowhere near what makes Maoyu so much fun. Um, but like, it's I don't know. I'm not sure if the Maoyu I feel like comparing it to Maoyu makes the show even worse than it already is, and this is not a great show. But yeah. Anyway, moving on. Um, so I do. There are. I will say this: going into the infamous cave sequence, which has only been around for 2 or 3 weeks at this point, is already well discussed and discussed by people way better than I am at discussing these things. I will say the show is really good at making you aware that something is going to go wrong. Already, when you see them all like cheering, oh yeah, we're gonna go kill some goblins, the receptionist is like, ooh, that ain't gonna go well. Um, and you see once they get to the cave, all the mistakes they're making. The guy is like swinging his sword around and he keeps hitting it on the roof, and all these little things. They didn't bring any potions because, oh, it's just some goblins. Um, and so, like, it really does, ramp up the tension. And I'm not entirely sure how much of that, if I had watched this, before everyone started talking about that first sequence, if I would have felt that tension, or if, like, that tension is just a byproduct of the hype around this series. I don't know. But the fight itself is also tense. It's incredibly uncomfortable to sit through. But it is tense as you watch. The sword guy, hit the roof again, and then he drops the sword, and then he gets mauled to death by the goblins. The fighter girl, she's bare fisting everything with bare punching things. And then she gets stopped by the hobgoblin, which is like a classic oh fuck moment. So at first, I think it's a little, exploitative. And not it's exploitative later. It's a little grimdark for grimdark's sake. But it is tense. But after a while, by the time, fighter girl is getting raped by goblins and priestess is pissing herself, the whole thing is just, it starts out a little bit too, as I said, grimdark for grimdark's sake. And at that point, it's just unnecessary. You don't need that. I saw a defense of the scene. Oh, it's a dark fantasy. What do you expect? Without being incredibly, grisly in its depiction of sexual assault, and that's bullshit. You can have dark fantasy without raping your cast. Like, what? You know, like, Ghoul is a dark fantasy, and as much as I've been complaining about Ghoul on my Ghoul videos, at no point does this happen in Ghoul. So no, you don't need to have a rape for your dark fantasy to be dark enough, you edgelord Tumblr 14-year-olds. Sorry. Where was I? Alright, so my final judgment of the Cave Massacre. It's well made. You know, the animation's good, the art's good, the lighting really works to bring out the tension, the voice actors really do get their, really, you know, do their money's worth. But the story behind it just doesn't work. It's so, maybe it would work a lot better if I were, you know, 13 or 14, you know, never seen, I heard a lot of people compare this to Ninja Scroll of the 80s and 90s, you know, that kind of relentlessly dark experience. And I spent a good bit of time trying to think of, like, what this would be for, like, my generation, and, like, maybe Titan? Except Titan cared too much about its cast to do this. I don't know. I never really got into Future Diary, but maybe Future Diary. But yeah, it's... The closest thing I could come to is Titan, except Titan is infinitely better because Titan gives a shit about its cast. And that's the next thing I want to bring up. Because, to me, in order to have a good story, you have to care about your characters. As a writer, you need to care about your characters, and whoever's writing Goblin Slayer does not care about these guys at all. They're just there for, like... for some kind of perverse enjoyment of watching people get murdered and sexually assaulted, which is not fun. And I guess there are probably 14-year-olds who would find that amusing, or entertaining, but it doesn't really work in the end. But it does start to get better once Goblin Slayer himself comes into the picture. Mainly because once, you know, Goblin Slayer shows up and he starts winning, there are both a lot more interesting as like Goblin Slayer's, you know, tricks are actually kind of interesting. And also once he gets there, the goblins aren't, you know, torturing and killing and raping people all the time. They're just dying, and that's, I don't know. I feel like it just gets better once Goblin Slayer shows up. But then Priestess, who has survived the whole thing, and Goblin Slayer get to the lair of the goblins. And, you know, Goblin Slayer wipes out the goblins until he kicks down a door and finds, like, 4 or 5, like, goblin children. And there's this nice little scene where, like... I say nice little scene, nothing really nice about it, but, this, at least interesting little scene, where, Goblin Slayer goes to, you know, kill the goblin children, because he's the Goblin Slayer. And Priest is like, whoa, they're kids, let them do their thing. And, you know, she's like, yeah, let them have peace. And, like, and Goblin Slayer has this admittedly fairly practical, approach of being like, no, they're gonna kill us if we don't kill them. So, like, best get on with it. Which is, I mean, as far as the show's gone by this point, I guess, you know, it does make sense, but, you know, it is what it is. And then after that is kind of the end of the first episode. And it's just weirdly optimistic. You know, Priestess has watched her friends get murdered, like the day before. And she comes out ready to work with Goblin Slayer some more. And, like I get if she, like, felt a duty because, you know, her party died and she survived and, you know, she wants to help the man who helped her. But she seems too optimistic about working with him, and, like, that just seems kind of weird to me. So yeah, that's the first episode. What is there to say about it that has not already been said? So I'll move right along into episode 2. It opens with a flashback with a red-haired girl, and the young Goblin Slayer. And I was full-on expecting her... So, yeah, like, she's going into the capital or something for some trip or something. And I was expecting, my initial theory as I watched was, I knew there would be a goblin attack in this backstory, because it's Goblin Slayer's backstory, and of course there would be. But I was full on expecting the red-haired girl to be like, his like, woe is me tragic backstory or something, and like, oh, she dies in the capital. But it's actually the other way around. The goblins attack the village, and his sister's the woe is me tragic backstory character. But yeah. And then the silver-haired boy does try to be Goblin Slayer. And then we have the OP, which is nice. It's nothing special, but it shows the main characters, and it's an OP. It's nothing, not anything great or anything, but it does the job, I guess. And then we head to the guild, or what, I'm not sure if it's a guild in this show, but it's probably a guild, because this is so clearly rooted in like JRPGs. And we have a quick scene with the guild receptionist and this guy like boasting about how he like took down, like, was it a minotaur or something? It's been a few days since I watched episode 2. Like all by himself, like, oh, aren't I so cool? Trying to like boast and whatever the straight person's equivalent of flirting is. And this scene does show more humor in it than really anything else in the series. It's actually kind of funny, So every now and then, Goblin Slayer does have a bit of a sense of humor. But then I need to talk about when we find out red-haired girl's still alive, and for whatever reason, we need to have like constant shots of her nude. Like she, for whatever reason, unlike a normal person who sleeps with like their blanket, covering their entire body, she sleeps like her blanket's just barely covering like the bottom of her boobs. And like, why? Why is this? Oh, right, I remember. This show is marketed to horny 13-year-old boys. Right, that's why. That's the entire reason. No plot there. Alright. This is normally the part where I apologize for being such a downer, but you know what? Nah, this show was too much of a downer itself. It brought this on itself. Yeah. But in the second episode, there is one single, like, genuinely happy moment. All throughout, we see this new party, who, much like Priestess's party in the first episode, goes to fight a horde of goblins, and, oh, it's a new party to get brutally murdered again. Yay! But they don't. They get home safely, and I was, like, really happy. I was, like, really invested in their story, and they are still alive, and I like that. But as that's going on, Priestess and Goblin Slayer head out to this fort. While they're at that fort, Goblin Slayer does his goblin slaying thing, and he kills all the goblins. And all throughout, there's this kind of like, Goblin Slayer hates the goblins to the point that like, there's a line, I forget if Goblin Slayer or Priestess herself has it, that's like, to the goblins, I'm the goblin. I'm the one who's showing up and just murdering them all wholesale. And that's a really cool thing going on with Goblin Slayer. Judging by episode 3, I don't know if they're doing anything with it. But it would be kind of an interesting moral dilemma to take for this show. I don't quite expect them to do anything with it because, again, marketed to horny 13-year-olds, just want to see some boobs and blood. But, the fortress scene itself is actually pretty good as far as the show is concerned. Like, we see a bunch of dead bodies being, we see they've been tortured and probably raped because this is Goblin Slayer, and of course they have. But we don't watch it, for one thing, which already makes it just feel less exploitative than anything the cave sequence threw at us. And there's just this, like, kind of tragic air to the whole thing that, I don't know, it doesn't feel like, the cave sequence felt like it was supposed to be, like, fun in its horror, It was like, oh, look at all this awful stuff happening to people. And, it kind of felt like we were supposed to get a kick out of it. You don't get that feeling in the Fortress. And I feel like it just is infinitely better for that. And I think that's especially shown in, I think it's a post-credit sequence, or right before the credits. We see, like, a bard, like, singing the story of, Goblin Slayer going to the fortress and killing them all. and it's this super fun, like, yeah, go Goblin Slayer, and it really like stands out in contrast to how, you know, different the Bard's story is to what we saw Goblin Slayer do earlier in the episode. It actually works pretty well. But yeah, that's where episode 2 ends. And before we get into our look back at all of it, look back at the episodes, we still have one episode to go. I don't actually have a lot of notes for this episode, just because, I don't know, this episode was kind of boring, I guess. I don't know. There is one genuinely incredible moment, and it's the very beginning, where we find out that they say that the gods roll dice for who would control the world. But judging by the number of times they rolled dice and the variety of dice, I straight up think the genuine backstory for the world of Goblin Slayer is the gods play D&D over it. Or, oh shit, the entire show is the gods playing D&D over the world. Calling it now. That's my Goblin Slayer theory. I'm gonna be right. The whole thing, like, cause like that story about the gods playing dice doesn't go anywhere in this episode. But it does, because the whole thing is, oh, I'm onto something. I'm onto something, y'all. I'm right. Just y'all watch. I'm right. But yeah, after that, we are introduced to this group of, there's a high elf, a dwarf, and a lizard person. All of whom are kind of cliche. Eventually, after a while, the dwarf and they had kind of like grown on me a little bit. But at first, they're not really above the cliche Tolkien-esque descriptions. You know, the dwarf and the elf have to hate each other. The elf is a vegetarian, not a vegan, because she does eat cheese at the end of the episode. The dwarf is, you know, small and stocky, which is kind of a dwarf thing. And I don't really think... Did Tolkien have lizard people? I'm really kind of, like, blurry on... I know, like, the vague outline of Lord of the Rings, but, like, I'm not really that Tolkien person. But yeah, they eventually kind of grow, but they're not really all that special. Judging by the opening, I think they're kind of here to stay, because they're, you know, all up in Goblin Slayer's, like, shield beads. But yeah, after that, Goblin Slayer walks in, and the group is looking for Goblin Slayer, so they drag Goblin Slayer off to discuss the mission. I'll get to in a little bit. And then I think it's the same group from episode 2 tries to enlist Priestess before she's saved by a witch lady who is pretty much just there as another fan service character, because, again, the target audience is horny 13-year-old boys. Yeah. But anyway, we head to... After that, we get in on Goblin Slayer's meeting, and we find out that the most cliche high fantasy plotline of all time is going on. The Demon Lord has woken up. He's amassing all the demons, and they're gonna go attack the humans. Yada yada yada. And Goblin Slayer doesn't care. Both the character and the show don't give a single rat's ass about that plotline. Goblin Slayer just wants to kill goblins, which, you know, we'll see how much that it can really last as just being a show about goblin killing, especially when the goblins have no personality whatsoever. But you know. But eventually they reveal that they're actually, some of these demons are goblins, and that, you know, they need to go kill the goblins. Are you in to kill goblins? And Goblin Slayer's like, hell yeah, I'm in to kill goblins. I'm the Goblin Slayer. It's what I do. But he's like, also, I'm not gonna bring Priestess along. She's had enough work, which, like, I guess is him actually caring about someone, which is alright. And so he's like, Priestess, you're staying here. And Priestess is like, can we have a discussion about this? And Goblin Slayer genuinely is like, aren't we? And there's something really funny in just how dense he is. He doesn't even consider that, like, a discussion means he has to actually, like, discuss things with Priestess instead of just tell her things. So that kind of worked. And then really the rest of the episode was this, like, long campfire. Which was kind of cute after a while. At first, it was pretty rote, you know, just them all talking, and, you know, their motivations, which are all pretty boring. You know, the high elf was bored, and the lizard person has this long story about becoming a dragon eventually, I think. Goblin Slayer, of course, just wants to slay dragons. We then find out about the dead sister. But, they kind of warm on you a little bit. It's still very, kind of cliche. But it does the job. And then after that, they head to the Goblin Fortress. The elf lady kills 2 goblins and their wolf all at once. And then the episode ends, which is our first 3 episodes of Goblin Slayer. So, these 3 episodes are shaky at best. There's definitely an audience for this kind of show. I mentioned Ninja Scroll and probably Future Diary, I think. Again, never saw Future Diary. And maybe the kind of people who like Titan for the wants and violence and not for the character work that makes Titan good. Those kind of people would definitely probably like this show. Maybe me 7 or 8 years ago would have enjoyed it. Oh my god, something so dark and edgy. But the me of today, I don't got time for dark and edgy. Life is short. Don't hate people. All I gotta say on that. That's my problem with like edgelord culture. It's bullshit. The show is just kind of exploitative, mean-spirited, fan service heavy, which I know I'm gonna get, hypocrisy claims for loving Fairy Tail and bashing this for being fan service heavy. But I complain about Fairy Tail's fan service problems too. I just care about the cast of Fairy Tail more than I will ever care about the cast of Goblin Slayer. But it's just not very fun. But you know what? This is what y'all voted for in that review straw poll, so here we are, Goblin Slayer. Yeah. So, I've said just about everything I have to say about these 3 episodes. Maybe it'll get better. I'm not holding my breath, though. So yeah. Hope you all enjoyed this video and these 3 episodes. If you did, I don't know why you're watching this, because I'm going to be spending all of fall season shitting on your show. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. The show is pretty miserable. But yeah, anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to drop me a like, subscribe, or do whatever the fuck you want. I don't really care. And as always, people, keep kicking ass, and I'll see you in the future. Bye!